Vivid verses.
I knew it was over before she said a word that night. I've been watching her for 20 minutes from across the kitchen. The way she kept glancing at her phone, the angle of her shoulders when she finally looked up at me, that specific brightness in her eyes that wasn't happiness, wasn't excitement, but was something closer to calculation dressed up as warmth. Camille had to tell. Most people do, and most people never figure out what it is. Hers was that she'd smile a half beat too early, before whatever she was about to say had fully arrived, as if the smile could soften the landing in advance. She smiled like that now. "You're going to love this," she said. "Brendan's throwing a thing Saturday. His whole group, the back patio, probably 20, 25 people. He specifically asked if we were coming." I set my fork down. Not hard, not with any drama. I just set it down. "I'll pass on this one," I said. "You should go if you want. You always say that, and then you end up having fun. I know what I enjoy, Camille." She'd moved to the other side of the counter by then, leaning on it with her elbows, chin propped in one hand. She had this gift for making herself look smaller when she wanted something from you, making herself look like a question you were too mean not to answer. 3 years in, I still noticed when she did it. "That's not the same as it working." "It will mean a lot to Brendan," she said. "Brendan has 25 people. He won't notice. He'll notice if you're not there." I picked up my fork again, and that was the end of that conversation for the evening. But I stored it the way I store things, not with resentment, which is a form of carrying someone else's weight, but clinically the way a doctor notes a symptom that doesn't yet have a name. The thing about Camille was that she was extraordinary in most of the ways that mattered. She was funny in the way that smart people are funny, which is to say she was funny when she wasn't trying to be and merely clever when she was. She was generous with strangers and careless with money in equal measure, which I'd long since accepted as a package deal. She had a quality I've always respected. She was honest about what she wanted. She just sometimes confused wanting it with deserving it without cost. We'd been together long enough that I knew all her habits the way you know the layout of a room you've lived in for years. Not because you think about it, but because your body has already mapped every corner. I knew she talked louder when she felt uncertain. I knew she apologized by making her favorite food rather than saying the actual words. I knew she needed to feel like she had a small audience, even if that audience was just me, and that on her best days that quality made her magnetic, and on her worst it made her careless with other people's dignity. We'd had the argument 3 months ago. The first time, it had started the way these things always start, small, with a misunderstanding that wasn't really a misunderstanding. I told her I didn't want to go to her colleague Tessa's birthday dinner. Not because I disliked Tessa, who was perfectly fine, but because I'd had a bad week, and I told Camille that, plainly, without performance. I said, "I'm depleted this week. I need a quiet night. I'm not up for a room full of people I don't know well." What I got back was, "You always do this. You just don't try. You need to man up and come." I remember the quality of the silence in the room after she said it. Not uncomfortable silence. Still silence. The kind that happens when something has shifted and hasn't finished moving yet. I looked at her for a long moment. "Don't do that again," I said. "Don't tell me to man up. Don't treat my telling you how I feel as something to dismiss." She recognized the register. I could see it. The slight recalibration behind her eyes, the way her chin lifted a fraction before she nodded. "You're right. I'm sorry. That was a bad way to put it." And we moved on, because I don't believe in prolonging apologies that have been made. You accept it or you don't, and I accepted it. 2 months later, she said it again. We'd been on the phone, and I'd told her I wasn't going to be able to come to the Sunday thing at her friend Petra's. I caught myself at her friend Lena's. My brother had called, rare enough that it registered as important, and he needed to talk. Family before social obligation. This is not a position I've ever had to explain. Camille's response, after a pause that told me she was choosing her words and not choosing them well enough was, I just feel like sometimes you need to be a little more, I don't know, present. Like, man up a bit and just come. That phrase again, man up, as if my interiority were a character flaw. As if choosing where to spend my energy were something I needed to be toughened out of. I let a beat pass before I responded. Camille, just her name, with enough space around it that she knew it wasn't preamble to something casual. We've had this conversation once before. When you dismiss what I tell you I'm feeling as weakness, it's not something I'm going to keep explaining. I'm telling you now, directly, this is the last time I'll say this. I won't keep circling back to it. A pause from her end of the line. Okay, she said, quieter. Okay, you're right. I know. I hear you. Good. And that was that. I'm in it. I have never in my life issued a warning I didn't intend. And I've never believed in the kind of warning that carries an asterisk. Unless you cry, unless you apologize well enough, unless I've cooled down. When I say a thing has an end, the end is real. I thought she understood that. She was smart enough to. That part one no.es. Saturday came. I wore the dark blue shirt she'd bought me, which I'd done deliberately and without malice. Whatever was going to happen tonight, it wouldn't happen because I'd showed up armored for it. I drove. Camille had spent the car ride being cheerful in the easy, unguarded way she was when she wasn't managing herself, which made me cautiously optimistic. Maybe she'd remembered. Maybe the two conversations had actually landed in the permanent part of her brain rather than the temporary holding area where she put things she didn't want to think about. Brendan's patio was already full when we got there. I estimated 23 people. String lights, a gas fire pit, coolers, a table of food somebody's wife had clearly made because it was too good and too plentiful to be catered. Good crowd, actually. A couple I'd met once before near the fence. A few people I didn't know, but whose faces had the open quality that makes strangers easy to talk to. I was fine. I want to be clear about that. I was genuinely fine, talking to a guy named Corvin about an engine he was rebuilding, half a drink in, feeling the evening settle into something manageable. Camille had migrated to a cluster of women on the far side of the fire pit, which was its own social ecosystem and required nothing from me. Then the clusters shifted the way they do at parties, some gravitational thing that happens when enough people move at once. And Camille was suddenly part of the main circle, the one near the fire where Brendan held court. I drifted over naturally when Corvin got pulled away by his wife. The conversation in the circle was easy, that free-ranging Saturday night talk that bounces from topic to topic without agenda. Someone said something about a hiking trip. Someone else mentioned a work thing. Brendan said something that made everyone laugh, and Camille was laughing too. That big laugh of hers that started in her chest. And for a moment, everything was uncomplicated. Then the conversation turned to, of all things, introversion. One of the women, I never got her name, 40s, short hair, said she'd been reading about it. How introverts actually needed social time, but just processed it differently. My husband is one, she said. He doesn't think he is, but he is. He comes home from a party, and he's completely drained. Same, said another woman. Mine needs 2 days to recover from dinner with people. General murmur of recognition. Oh, I live with one of those, Camille said, and I felt the air pressure change slightly, the way it does before rain. She nodded in my direction with a smile. Not malicious exactly, but performative. He'll do anything to get out of a social thing. I basically had to drag him here tonight. That wasn't accurate, but I let it pass. People exaggerate for the rhythm of a story. He texted me a full paragraph about why he couldn't come to a dinner once, she continued. Warming up now. I swear. A whole paragraph. Low laughter. I smiled because it was a small thing. And I told him to sometimes you just have to man up, right? Like, life doesn't care if you're introverted. You show up. There it was. Delivered lightly. To an audience. In that particular tone, that communicates the speaker has chosen it, considered it, and is betting on the crowd to absorb the weight so the target feels small if he objects. I know this because I've studied people my entire adult life, not to manipulate them, but because understanding how people work is the same as understanding how the world works, and I've never seen the point in being uninformed. She was betting on my patience. More specifically, she was betting on my silence being indistinguishable from acceptance. She thought the presence of witnesses made me more likely to absorb it, not less. She calculated that I would want to avoid a scene, and that wanting to avoid a scene would look from the outside like a man who could take a joke. She forgot one thing. I have never confused choosing not to make a scene with choosing to stay. I looked at her for exactly as long as it took to confirm what I already knew. Then I turned to the man on my left, a guy named Dev who'd been good company for the 20 minutes I'd spoken to him. "Good to meet you tonight," I said, and I shook his hand. "You too, man." I said something brief to Brendan. Great setup, the fire's perfect, and I meant it because it was true and because I have no interest in poisoning other people's evenings with whatever Camille and I were doing. Then I turned to Camille. "I'm heading out," I said, quietly enough that it wasn't theater. "Enjoy the night." She blinked. "What? Right now?" "Yes. But—" "Good night, Camille." I set my drink down on the table beside me. I said goodbye to the woman with the short hair, whose name I hadn't caught, because she'd been pleasant company and it wasn't her fault. And then I walked through the gate at the side of the house, past the cars lined up along the curb, to my own. I sat in the driver's seat for 30 seconds. Not out of hesitation, out of clarity. I found that when something very important has just happened, it's worth giving it 30 seconds of stillness before you move. I drove home. She called twice before I got there. I didn't answer, not because I was punishing her, but because there was nothing in me that needed to say anything else that night. I'd said everything that needed saying already over the course of 3 separate conversations across 3 separate months. The phone calls were going to be versions of "Are you serious right now?" And it was just a joke, and you're being dramatic, and I'd heard those songs before and knew all the words and had no interest in singing them. The apartment was quiet. I made tea, which is a habit from a period in my early 20s when I decided coffee was too harsh for late nights and never reversed the decision. I sat at the kitchen table, not brooding, just thinking in the organized way I think when something is crystallized. What I was thinking was, she heard me. Both times, she heard me. She looked at me with comprehension in her eyes, and she said the right things, and then she went and did it anyway. That's not impulsiveness. That's a calculation. The calculation she'd been running was, his patience is very long, and his warnings are theater, and if I push past them, nothing permanent happens. She had run that calculation twice and arrived at the same wrong answer, which told me the calculation was not going to change. The question I had to ask myself next was simple. Not is this fixable, because most things technically are, in the way a cracked foundation is technically fixable if you're willing to tear everything down to the ground and start from scratch. The question was, given everything I know about this woman, given who I actually am and what I actually will and won't absorb over the course of a life, is what she is now what I want to build a future with? I knew the answer before I finished the question. She came home at 11:40. I heard her key in the lock, heard the deliberate quietness of her coming inside, which told me she was still in performance mode, choosing a tone before she'd even seen my face. She found me at the kitchen table. "Hi," she said. "Hi." She pulled out the chair across from me and sat down, which I thought was the right call. She didn't hover. She didn't stand at the counter doing the smaller version of herself thing. She sat, which told me she'd decided on directness, at least. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know. It was stupid. I wasn't thinking." "You were thinking," I said, not unkindly. "You knew the crowd would laugh. You made a choice." She held eye contact, which I respected. "You're right. Yes, I made a bad choice. Twice, I said. You made it twice. She paused. I could see her weighing the cost of arguing that point. She didn't argue it. I know, she said. I told you twice that this was a line. The first time I told you was because I meant it. The second time I told you was because I was being generous with you. I gave you more notice than I would give most people. I know that too. And tonight you chose the audience over what I told you. She looked down at the table for the first time. I wasn't trying to humiliate you. I know you weren't trying to. The effect is the same. So what does this mean? She asked, and her voice had gone careful, which was not the same as quiet. It means I need some time to think, I said, which was true. I already knew what I thought, but a decision of this scale deserves at least the respect of sleeping on it, of giving your own certainty a chance to erode if it's going to. How much time? Don't ask me to schedule this. She nodded. She went to bed. I stayed at the table a while longer, drinking the last of my tea, which had gone cold. I was certain by morning. Not furious. Not sad. Exactly. Grief is an appropriate word because I did love her genuinely and without reservation. And you can both love someone and recognize clearly that the thing you have with them is not built on ground that will hold. I'd built enough in my life to know the difference between a structure that has a fixable flaw and one where the foundation itself is the problem. The foundation problem here was this. Camille needed a man whose patience she could not exhaust. Not because she was cruel, she wasn't, but because she had learned, somewhere in her history, that patience without limit was love, and love without limit was the thing that made her feel safe. What she called safety, I called a cage, and I'd known that tension was there, somewhere beneath everything, and I had believed, genuinely believed, that the explicit conversations, the specific language, the clarity I'd given her would translate. They hadn't. Not because she didn't understand. Because understanding and changing are not the same thing, and she did not change. I spent 3 days doing what needed to be done, methodically. I have a lawyer I trust. The situation was not complicated in legal terms. We were not married, which simplified things considerably. What I was drawing up was a separation of a shared life. The apartment, the logistics, a clean accounting of what was mine and what was hers. I kept working. I kept my routines. I slept fine, which some people would read as cold, and which I would read as the result of having been honest with myself every step of the way. When you don't deceive yourself about what you're going to do, the doing of it doesn't require recovery. She called daily. I answered twice. The first call was short. I told her I was thinking and I'd be in touch. The second call, I let go to voicemail because I'd recognized by then that I didn't need more input to make my decision and that taking the call would only introduce more noise. On the fourth day, I sent the documentation. Her first response was a text. Are you serious? I didn't reply. An hour later, another. This is not what I thought you meant when you said you needed time to think. I thought you meant days. I thought we were going to talk. I didn't reply. Then a call. Then another. Then a text. Can we please just sit down and talk about this before you do something irreversible? I replied to that one. I'd be happy to talk. Let me know what works this week. She called within 40 seconds. This is insane, she said, not angrily, but with the particular sharpness of someone who has just realized the ground is less solid than they thought. You're doing this because of one thing at a party? It wasn't one thing, I said. It was a joke. I was making conversation. I know you thought it was a joke, and you're ending us over it. Not a question. Her voice had a quality I hadn't heard before, a specific disbelief that comes from finally taking a thing seriously that should have been taken seriously earlier. I'm ending it because I told you twice where the line was. You crossed it the second time in front of people, and this is the outcome I told you would happen. I was exact about this, Camille. I wasn't ambiguous. But people say things. I say what I mean. A pause. You can't just... People work through things. You don't just leave after 3, she caught herself. After everything. People don't do that. I do. That's not. Another pause. Longer. She was reorganizing her argument. I could feel the shift. So this was decided before the party. You had this ready. No. I decided after the party. But you had the papers drawn up in 4 days. Yes. That's not a decision made after a party, she said. And there was something sharpening in her now. That's someone who wanted out and found a reason. I sat with that for a moment, because it deserved sitting with. The question of whether she was right, whether I'd been looking for a door and simply walked through the one she opened, is worth examining with some honesty. That's a good question, I said finally. I've thought about it. Silence. My answer is, I'm not a man who needs a reason to leave. If I'd wanted out for some other reason, I would have said so. What I wanted was for you to hear me. I told you twice, explicitly, with as much precision as I know how to give. You heard me both times. I could see it on your face. And then you did it again. Quiet on her end. Long quiet. I love you, she said, and she meant it. That much I know. I know that, I said. And you're still doing this. Yes. So what does love mean to you? If it doesn't mean, it means I told you the truth at every step, I said. It means I gave you real information about who I am and what I do, and I wasn't performing. It means I loved you enough to be honest with you instead of just absorbing it to keep the peace. That's what love meant from my side. Another silence. Different quality. Not angry now. Something else. I think I always thought your calmness meant there was more room, she said quietly. Like calm meant flexible. I thought it was patience without end. Yes, she said. Yes. I thought you'd always. I know what you thought. Pause. I should have believed you, she said. Yes. She asked to meet in person. I agreed because it was a reasonable request and because I believed she deserved a conversation that wasn't mediated by a phone screen. We met at a coffee place near the apartment, the small one on the corner that's always half empty on weekday afternoons. I got there first. I ordered coffee. I sat near the window. She walked in wearing the gray coat she always wore when she wanted to be taken seriously, which I noticed and said nothing about. She ordered something, sat across from me, wrapped both hands around the cup. She looked, I thought, genuinely tired. Not sat performing, actually tired. The kind that comes from several days of lying awake, reassembling memories, and realizing they've been assembling the wrong picture. I've been going back through things, she said. Okay. And I keep thinking I knew. Both times I knew. After the first conversation, I knew you meant it. After the second, I knew. I wasn't, she stopped. Restarted. I wasn't confused about what you meant. I know. So, what was I doing? I didn't answer. It wasn't a question for me. She seemed to understand that. She looked down at her cup. I think I was testing it. Testing whether it was real. I've been with people who said things, and they didn't mean them, and eventually you could push through, and they'd bend. And you never bent. And I think part of me kept expecting you to. She looked up. That's not a good thing to tell you. It's an honest thing, I said. I prefer honest. You were never going to bend. No. Even now. Even sitting here. She gestured, small motion, between us. You're not. You're not on the edge of changing your mind. I can see that. You're right. She was quiet for a while. I drank my coffee. Outside, a car pulled slowly past the window. What could I have done, she asked, at the party, when I felt the joke forming? What could I have? Just not said it. Yes. Just not said it. You've been told twice. You knew what it cost. You could have chosen not to say it. She nodded slowly. Not performing understanding now. Actually processing it. In the way people process things when the argument phase is over and only the accounting remains. I think I've been lucky, she said after a while. With other people, I pushed and people absorbed it, and I never had to find where the actual end was. You found it. I found it. She said it like she was putting a pin in a map. I found yours. We sat a while longer. We didn't argue. There was nothing left to argue about. She cried briefly, with the contained quality of someone who has already done most of their crying elsewhere and has arrived at the conversation holding the last of it. I handed her a napkin and didn't make it smaller or larger than it was. When she stood to leave, she paused. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Okay, if I had stopped at the party, if I felt it coming and I just stopped, will we be here?" I looked at her directly. "No, we would not be here." She held that. "Turn it over." "That's the worst part," she said. Probably, I agreed. She left. I finished my coffee. I sat another 10 minutes watching the street, the ordinary afternoon traffic of people who had no idea what had just ended in the corner table by the window. I thought about what she'd said. "I kept expecting you to bend," and I recognized in it something important. It wasn't malice. It was a miscalculation made from a map that had been accurate everywhere else she'd used it. I was just different terrain. I paid and left. I walked back to the apartment, which still held both of us in it for a few more weeks of logistics, and I started the process of sorting what was mine. Not with anger, not with grief in the drowning sense, with the particular kind of forward motion that comes from having been honest with yourself about what you're doing and why, every step of the way. I'd warned her. I don't warn people for my benefit. I warn them so that when the ending comes, there is no ambiguity about whether it was real. So the ending is clean. This one was. Her last message came on a Sunday, 2 weeks later. It was long. I read it in full, which I'd promised myself I would do, because she deserved to be heard even at the end. She didn't ask me to reconsider. That, I thought, showed growth, the recognition that the door was not ajar and that knocking on it was not the same as it opening. What she said instead was this. She understood now what I've been telling her. She'd talked to some people. She'd done some thinking. She said she was angry at herself more than anything else. She said she hoped I'd find something uncomplicated. I sat with the message for a few minutes before I replied. "Thank you for this," I wrote. "I wish you well." I mean that. I set the phone face down on the counter and went back to what I was doing, which was assembling the last of my books into boxes. The apartment was quiet. I was not waiting for anything.
Thanks for listening.